So welcome everyone to our session on the Hebrew calendar, an overview of the calendar, which includes an overview of most of the holidays and a little bit deeper discussion of Shabbat. And my goal is not to get lost in the holidays, because actually our next session is going to be on the holidays. And I do want to leave more time for discussing Shabbat. Okay, so question I always ask, forgive my insecurity in this regard, can everybody see the PowerPoint presentation? Yes? Okay.
I can, yes.
Okay, good. So here we go. And as I always mention on my website, lotker.com, if you, this should not be labeled supporting materials. This is actually recordings. So for those of you who haven't been in it from the beginning, or for those of you who are listening or to some or all online, if you just click on classes either here or here and thumb down a little bit, I will be listing all the classes, and I do think they work. And then there's also, I just got the headlines wrong. So, and then also supporting materials, the handouts are also on this. There you need to go to classes and then click the little button that says actually Jewish literacy class. And I'm gonna again keep track of who is here. Okay, welcome Suzanne. Okay, so the Hebrew calendar, like everything about Judaism, fascinates me. But there's a logical philosophy behind the concept of the Hebrew calendar, and that is that the Hebrew year is a flow and things are interconnected. There is a wonderful book which is on the suggested reading list called The Jewish Way by Irving Greenberg. And it's a deeper spiritual investigation of each of the holidays. And it's quite good. I can always tell, the books that I love because, I have so many that they're almost completely yellow from highlighting. And then also I always put together my own little index in the back. So he points out that Judaism, of course, is a way of life, and the calendar with a cycle is a guide to the religious and spiritual life. The central paradigm, the central point of Judaism is redemption. You could also use the term salvation. And of course, as I think I have mentioned, I hope I've emphasized that for Jews, the idea of redemption and salvation is not about what happens to me in the next life. It's about what my job is in this life. For Jews, redemption and salvation are about making this world better. Christianity definitely has much more of a focus on the next life. And in one of our afternoon sessions, we were talking about, is the reason to follow commandments to be rewarded for being good little boys and girls. And so you're rewarded with a wonderful life in heaven. And is that the reason we do commandments? And the answer is no. We do commandments because we are so grateful to God. And we are, as part of that gratitude, we are motivated to do the kinds of things that God wants us to do, which is to make this world a better place. As you may know, I hope you know, in Judaism, the days begin at sunset. So right about now, we're switching over from one day to another. Why is that? Because in the opening of the Bible, you see repeated quite often in the description of the 7 days of creation, it says, and it was evening and it was morning a first day, and it was evening and it was morning a second day. It doesn't say, and it was morning and it was evening. So evening comes first, therefore the days begin at sunset. And so Shabbat, which we think of as Saturday, begins at Friday night at sunset. And of course, that's very specific to wherever you are, because the sun doesn't set the same place. I'm trying to get this little magnet off. I had the local Chabad sent me, yeah, you can see it focuses pretty well, sent me, so this is for Camarillo, what time you light candles, which is typically 18 minutes before sunset. In Israel, there would be publications for each town, because there may be a minute or two difference. Murray.
Yeah, I always thought that the beginning of the day as a sunset, because for me, my day begins when I wake up.
Right.
So what's going on there?
Why does the day begin at sunset?
Well, on the seventh day, God rested. So does God go to bed in the morning or in the evening?
There's no issue of when God goes to bed. The issue is when does the day begin? And the answer is at sunset. And the reason is because in Genesis it says, and it was evening and it was morning, day one or day two. We're not going to, that's actually the answer.
So we shouldn't change our schedule. We shouldn't start waking up at sunset.
No, it has nothing to do with when you wake. It has nothing to do with when you wake up. What it has to do with is if you're going to celebrate Shabbat, for example, and you're not going to work and you're going to observe the rules of Shabbat, you need to start doing that at sunset Friday rather than when you wake up on Saturday. And the same thing, Yom Kippur begins on Sunday, but on Sunday night, because Yom Kippur, the 10th day of Tishrei, is actually Monday. Robin.
As a Reformed Jewish woman, I would light my candles when my family was around the Shabbat table. I did not light them according to the calendar. I lit them according to my family being together.
Right. And I would say that one of my understanding of the major difference in Reform Judaism compared to traditional Judaism is in Reform Judaism. We're going to have a session on the different movements. In Reform Judaism, the ethical laws are binding. The ethical Jewish laws are binding. And I would say those are laws on how you treat other people, animals, and the environment. The ritual laws, what time you light Shabbat candles, whether you keep strictly kosher or not, whether you pray 3 times a day and so on, you have this funny little hat on your head. Those laws are between you and God. And the question then becomes, how do you hear God speaking to you? But so as a Reform rabbi, my goal is always to explain what the tradition is, and then particularly as questions arise, to explain how different movements may handle the tradition. But for a traditional Jew, you light candles just before Shabbat. Why just before? Because once it's the Sabbath, you're not allowed to make a fire. And we're going to talk more about the Sabbath. So there are 12 months in the Hebrew calendar. Many of them, or some of them, are named after Babylonian gods like Tammuz. And actually, I don't keep track of each of them. And then notice in the month of Adar, we have 1 and 2. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. One of the interesting things is the Jewish calendar. Here I make a statement, I may be overstating this, but I have never come across another calendar that has its year 0 tied to a universal event. So the ones with which I'm very familiar, say, are the Gregorian calendar, the one where it says it's now the year 2020, is tied to the birth of Jesus. The Muslim calendar is tied not to the birth of Muhammad, but the year and the day of Muhammad, of one of Muhammad's critical pilgrimages. So most calendars are tied to some important event in the context of that religion. The Hebrew calendar, the Jewish calendar, is tied to what we would consider to be a universal event, namely the creation of the universe. Here's where it gets fun, particularly if you're a physicist or a mathematician.
Yes.
For those of you who have no interest in this, you can mute me and go, I don't know, go feed the plants. The Hebrew calendar is lunisolar. That means it's based both on the moon and on the sun. Each month begins with the new moon, with the unseen tiny crescent, or when the crescent disappears, and then after the new moon, the crescent appears. So when there is no moon, that's a new moon. That's the first day of every Hebrew month. The problem is, if you have 12 months, and we do, they are 30 and 29 days. If you multiply those 12 months and you count the number of days in them, you are 11 days short of a solar year. So if we didn't do anything, each holiday would occur 11 days earlier each year. And in fact, that's what happens in the Muslim calendar. Muslim calendar is also a lunar calendar, but they don't make any adjustment. And so Ramadan occurs 11 days earlier on the Gregorian calendar every year. So Ramadan can be in the summer, Ramadan can be in the winter. But in the Hebrew calendar, we have, in the Torah, it says Passover is on the 15th day of the month of Nisan, and it occurs in the spring. So we have to do something to keep Passover in the spring. So what you have in the Hebrew calendar is 7 times in a 19-year cycle, in year 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, and so on, we add an entire month. So I think many of you who are familiar with, keeping an eye on the Hebrew calendar will be saying, oh, Hanukkah is early this year, or Hanukkah is late this year. Hanukkah is the same day every year. It's the 25th day of Kislev. But the calendar flips around. So last year, some of these slides are from last year. I keep trying to go through it. Last year, the year was 5780. So if you divide that by 19, you get remainder 4. Raise your hand if you remember doing division with remainders. Good. You can stay and clean the erasers after class. Last year, you have 304 remainder 4. 4 isn't in there, so no leap month that year. This year, we would have remainder 5, no leap year. This no leap month this year. But next year we'll have remainder 6, and that's one of the months where there is a leap year. And as I mentioned, actually there's 2 issues: keeping Tishrei in the fall, in the harvest season, and keeping Nisan in the spring. And there is a holiday, Rosh Chodesh, which is the first day of every month. It's a minor Jewish holiday. It is a holiday when we actually take Torah scrolls out and read them. And because of the connection of the monthly cycle with women, it has become distinctively a women's celebration as a holiday.
Wait a minute. There's more to it, Rabbi Michael.
There's always more to it.
Yes. When we were camped at the foot of Sinai and everybody put in their jewelry to make the golden calf, the women refused. So Rosh Chodesh is in honor of the women who stood their ground and refused to give in to the men.
Okay, that's a midrash, and I have no problem with it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and here comes Beth. Let me just keep track of who's here.
We have to take all we can get.
Okay, yes. Murray.
In the Torah study here in Binghamton, Rabbi Barber went over and mentioned about the 7 days in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a physicist in our group too.
Oh.
And, so, you ask the brain or whatever, and nobody could think of any kind of natural thing that would decide why 7 was chosen.
Yes.
Like you have 10 fingers, why wasn't 10 chosen? Or...
Yeah, so you have, times like months, which are tied to a natural phenomenon, the moon. You have years, which are tied to the repetition of seasons. There is no natural phenomenon of 7 days. So, on one level, Shabbat is wholly a Jewish invention. This cycle of 7 days is wholly a Jewish invention. I remember coming across some scholars suggesting that there may have been a Babylonian cycle of 7 days as well, but I'm not sure about that. But it's absolutely true.
Well, Rabbi, it's also true that that at least in Western civilization, that the 7-day week is tied very closely to the number, and in fact, it's named after. Each day is named after one of the moving gods in the sky.
Yeah, so it's a good point. And when we've discussed
Moon
that
day,
in
sun
ancient
day.
times there were 7 moving celestial bodies, the planets that were either very large or very close, and the sun and the moon. And yes, you have Lunus and Martes, and and so on. So that could be, certainly that could be a connection also.
Yes.
So it is a tradition in Judaism to read one portion of the Torah each week. And so if you had a 13-month calendar, a 13-month year, which by the way is called a pregnant year, Shana Merubah, you would need 54 portions. If you have a regular year, you combine several of those portions. And as I mentioned, that's why holidays come earlier and later. So this year, Rosh Hashanah was September 19th. Next year, it will be September 7th. Yom Kippur, September 28th. Next year, it will be September 16th. And then we're going to add a month. So the year later, it will be October 5th, and so on. This year, Chanukah begins December 10th. Next year, Hanukkah begins in November, and then the year after Hanukkah will be in this December 19th. Then, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time belaboring this point. What happened in ancient times is you had to have at the temple in Jerusalem expert witnesses declaring, yes, the new moon has begun. And then they would get the word out. Now, it turns out Israel is not a very big country. So they would light bonfires or send messengers to the various towns saying the new month has begun. Most of the holidays in Judaism occur in the middle of the month at the full moon. Plenty of time to get the word out to celebrate the holiday. As the diaspora began and Jews were living in Egypt and Babylon, it was tougher to get the word out. Now, you could view the moon from wherever you were, and actually, even 2,000 years ago, they were pretty good at astronomy, so they could predict the phases of the moon. But what they did, just to make sure we didn't miss celebrating a holiday on a particular day, is they would add an extra day of the holiday. So that's why in the Bible, Passover is a 7-day holiday. But in the diaspora, if you're outside of Israel, it's an 8-day holiday, and we have 2 days, two different Seders. If you're inside Israel, it is a 7-day holiday. They don't have a second day of Passover. And the only exception to that is Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah begins at the new moon, and by the time it begins, it's already too late, and you can't light bonfires during a Jewish holiday. So they instituted an extra day of Rosh Hashanah, and in Israel, they still observe 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. By and large, the Reform official rule is to ignore second days of holidays, but in fact, many congregations still observe them, and particularly have a second Seder and even a second day of Rosh Hashanah. Let me move on. Okay, so here is an example of a calendar. Robin, you have a question.
Yeah, just a comment that when I grew up, 2 days of Rosh Hashanah was very important because you went one day to your parents and you went the second day to your in-laws.
You mean 2 days of Passover?
No, Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, okay. Okay. I get it. So here's an example of a calendar. I got it in the mail, my Chabad calendar. Normally, if you go to services, you will get a calendar from your synagogue. And I don't know how well you can see it, but typically so this is September. So here we are on September 23rd, and it is the 5th day of Elul at sunset tonight. And if it's a good calendar, it may give you candle lighting times, and it will also give you the Torah section that you are reading on that Saturday. And again, depending on how interactive it is, I mean, if I actually went to this site, and you can go to a site, you can print these. Quite often you can click on the Torah portion, and it will even bring up, the Torah portion or give you other resources. So there's a lot. So what we're looking at is September of this year. So here, if you look, and again, I don't know how well you can see it on this screen. I can't make it bigger. So the 27th on Sunday, it says Erev Yom Kippur. Erev means evening. So it's the evening of Yom Kippur, and it's giving you a candle lighting time. And then Monday, the 28th, which is the 10th day of Kislev, is Yom Kippur. And then I think that, this is, here's December. So another thing which is kind of nice is for Chanukah, here, this calendar is not only telling you, the first day of Chanukah is actually the 25th, but that evening you're lighting 2 candles. Whereas the evening before Chanukah, on this date, you light 1 candle. Again, Chanukah begins at sunset. And then here's kind of the cycle of the holidays and generally when they appear. And there is relationships here. So for example, Sukkot, we'll see that in a moment, the Feast of Tabernacles is exactly 6 months to the day after Passover. It's exactly 6 lunar months, I should say, after Passover. Whereas Passover, we'll see, represents the moment of liberation. Sukkot represents the 40 years of the cycle of what it took to actually get free. It didn't happen in one night. We will talk about how Atonement and Rosh Hashanah, trumpets, I'm not sure why they didn't say Rosh Hashanah here, comes just before the Feast of Tabernacles. There's an interesting perspective there. So there's a connection between all these things. They're not just sort of random holidays. So what I want to do is very briefly go through the list of holidays, the major and not so major holidays, and then spend more time on Shabbat. So we just went through Rosh Hashanah on last Shabbat, Friday night and Saturday. And with this, with the continuing theme of the book of life, and with the idea that there's somebody watching, that our actions count, and that our fate is a function of what we do. And while I don't take even close to literally the idea that there is literally God writing in a book, I do take quite seriously the idea that our lot in life and our satisfaction in life is very much determined by what we do. The Eastern religions call this karma. And I don't know, I know there's a couple of psychologists here. I would say generally, if you spend your life doing nice things for people, you're going to find they are likely to do nice things for you. It's not a one-on-one, people will still do horrible things to you and so on. But generally speaking, if you admire goodness in people, and those are the traits that you most value, you will hang out with those kinds of people. And I absolutely believe that your life will be better in the sense of how you feel about your life. Statistically, you may not have more money or a longer life or something, so I believe this is an ancient religious myth, which I believe is deeply true in a poetic sense. And we talked about this, that Rosh Hashanah, actually, when these slides were prepared, I was giving them before I gave the discussion of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the 7th month, a time for introspection. And we are actually in the 10 days of awe, when we're supposed to be working on the aspects of our life so that we will be favorably inscribed for a good year. And the fast being a way of embracing the idea of mortality and tasting death. And let me just go on. So 4 days after Yom Kippur, we have the holiday of Sukkot. And again, next week, we're going to talk about these holidays in more depth. So Yom Kippur is the deepest, and I would say in some ways the darkest holiday of the Jewish calendar. I often, in hanging out with my Christian colleagues, we all moan and groan that all the Jews show up on 2 holidays. I mean, all our congregants show up on 2 holidays. For Jews, it's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. For Christians, it's Christmas and Easter. And, I often observe at least Christmas and Easter are happy holidays. What are we saying in the high holiday liturgy? I'm dust, I've sinned. Let me give you, 20-something examples of sin. Just for laughs, I won't eat or brush my teeth or bathe for Yom Kippur. And I'll sit in a crowded room with other people who, if they're traditional, also haven't brushed their teeth and bathed. And we won't eat anything, and we will spend 24 hours deeply saying what sinners we are and how we're dust and we're really not worthy of anything. Boy, I can hardly wait till this happens again next year. But in the Hebrew calendar, 4 days after Yom Kippur is Sukkot, which is kind of like our Halloween. In one sense, in that you could even say Christmas, in that you have a sukkah and you decorate it, and we have this kind of really interesting custom of shaking a lulav, and we'll talk more about that next week. And they're so deeply connected that traditional Jews start building their sukkah, this little temporary hut, as soon as they break the fast. So for traditional Jews, on Monday night, as soon as you break the fast, the first thing you turn your attention to is building the sukkah. And we'll talk a lot more about it next time.
Is this a harvest holiday?
It is definitely related to the harvest holiday because it commemorates living in booths. So most Jewish holidays in the Bible are explained in the Bible as agricultural holidays. And Sukkot definitely is one of them. And it talks about how when during your harvest, you need to go out to the fields and you don't have tractors or cars to go back and forth. So you build temporary dwellings to live in the fields. The rabbis in the Talmud add a historical dimension to these holidays. And the historical dimension that the rabbis add is to see this as a commemoration of the 40 years of wandering in the desert. And the booths have to be fragile, and they're a reminder of the fragility of life. I don't know if you're raising your hand or...
Yeah, I wanted to finish the thought with
go ahead.
That. So with the fact that the Sukkot will move around as much as somewhere in 2 months, okay, according to the solar calendar.
Yes.
Then it's probably only symbolic. It'll already coincide with harvest just a few times.
Yes, and remember, the rabbis are going to fix the calendar in around the 4th century of the Common Era. So even then, Jews are starting to live in cities. And in reading, and doing some more reading on this, I learned that in the very early days, they would actually time the months or the added month to how the harvest was going. So rain's coming early, rain's coming later. So they would actually make the adjustment of when to add an additional month based on the agricultural cycle. Everything is about the fragility of life. Booths are a reminder of that. We read the biblical book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a book you need to read every 3 or 4 years, and it makes more sense as you get older. And then on the last day of Sukkot, we start praying for rain now that the rainy season has begun. We'll talk more about that next time, but just as almost a teaser, Jews pray for rain in the rainy season, not in the dry season. By way of explanation, the climate in Israel is very similar to the climate in Southern California. So there's a distinct rainy season and a distinct dry season. You might think we would pray for rain during the dry season. You'd be wrong for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, you can pray for rain till you're blue in the face during the dry season. It's not going to rain. That's why we call it the dry season. And you don't want to have wasted prayers. Number two, here I'll call for a response. If it doesn't rain during the dry season, is that a problem?
Yeah, I think so.
No, because it's the dry season.
Right, it's not supposed to rain. If it doesn't rain during the rainy season, is that a problem?
Yes, sir.
Yes. And in biblical times and in Talmudic times, it was mass starvation. It was more than we're going to level 3, water rationing. It was starvation because the crops didn't grow. If the crops didn't grow, you didn't eat, the animals didn't eat, and it was mass starvation. So there are some scholars who believe, I'll probably mention this again next week, that the timing of Sukkot, when we pray for rain, is tied to to Yom Kippur, because on the high holidays, we're cleansing our souls. The reason we're cleansing our souls is so we will be in better position, that God will answer our prayers for rain, because the prayers for rain are the most important prayers of the year. The last day, the 8th day, sometimes the 9th day, depending on whether you're in Israel or not in Israel, and so on. After Sukkot is called Simchat Torah, the rejoicing of the Torah. It's actually the day on which our reading cycle ends, the reading of the Torah at the book of Deuteronomy, and we jump right back into the book of Genesis. And typically, but certainly not this year, in Ventura County, we have all of our communities come together to celebrate Simchat Torah. And this is Rabbi J.B. Sachs. And we typically will open up an entire Torah scroll so you can see the whole scroll. Chanukah, this is one lots of people know about. Here are some symbols. The menorah, although the Hebrew word menorah refers to a generic candelabra, and technically this is a Chanukiah. In fact, the menorah, as a symbol of Israel, has 7 branches. A Chanukiah has 9, the 8 for one for each of the holiday, right, and the 9th shamash. Dreidels, a spinning game, gelt, and sufganiyot, foods made with oil. And again, I'll just go over quickly the story of Chanukah. It refers to a revolt that the Jews engaged in against the Syrian Greek oppressive rulers, and the end of the cycle in which we were able to rededicate the temple in Jerusalem. The word Chanukah means dedication. If you put a mezuzah on your doorpost outside, the name of what you're doing is Chanukat Habayit, the dedication of your home. I love to point out that without Chanukah, there would be no Christmas, because the successful revolt, which allowed the sustaining of Judaism, took place about 160, 170 years before the birth of Jesus. So had that revolt failed, Jesus wouldn't have been born Jewish, and we can only speculate on whether there would be a Christianity. But I also point out that without Christianity, we would know very little about Chanukah, because the historical records of the revolt are Jewish books called the books of Maccabees, which are not in our Bible, but they're in the Catholic and the Christian Orthodox Bible. And we'll talk a lot more next time about why that is. It's very interesting. Again, the menorah has 8 candles plus a shamash. You light from right to left. You place them from right to left. We'll talk more about this, about the proper way of doing this. If you don't get it right, I won't tell. But there is a way to do it. For everything in Judaism, there is a right way to do it. I will often say Jews have, the rabbis were obsessive compulsive about what you should do. I often wonder what Judaism would be like if there were psychotropic medications in Talmudic times. Murray.
The Hanukkah was another issue that we discussed last Hanukkah, because I asked Rabbi Barbara, which way should I light them, in the sense that normally we put them in a window.
Yes.
Okay, and I saw some. It was maybe in one of her handouts of a menorah with a swastika in the background because it was
Yes.
taken then. And the problem that I asked her about was, because there was also a lot of anti-Semitic sentiment over the past few years. And I said, why shouldn't I just light it, from right to left, the way I see it in my home, with my son, because it's for us. We're not trying to solicit Judaism to anybody. But then she said, well, part of it is to show it to the world.
Yes. So let me just comment, and we'll talk more about Hanukkah next time. The purpose of lighting the candles, or they were oil lamps in ancient times, was to publicize the miracle. And during times in which that would be a threat to your safety, you are allowed, not to put it in a place where it would be a threat to your safety. And there are some interesting examples, not only in Nazi times, but in Montana. And I'll share some of those stories next week. But the purpose is not for you. The purpose is to publicize the miracle. That's the purpose in the tradition.
Okay, that's how we did it growing up. It's just something that came to me recently, that I'm the adult, and it's my choice to decide.
So I would say it's absolutely your choice. And as I'll come back again and again to, my role is to teach the tradition and explain the tradition.
Okay.
One of the tradition for Ashkenazim is to eat latkes, and for the Sephardim, sufganiyot, jelly donuts. And the point is, again, we're fixated on the oil. So eat what is oily. Some of us are so religious that we eat oily and greasy foods all year long. And that's, I think of that as passionate dedication to, sounds like this is from, a Hanukkah story, that we should keep Hanukkah in our hearts all year long, even if that means clogging our coronary arteries all year long. And according to one rabbi, you are allowed to take Lipitor to counteract the latter. The dreidel, we'll talk about the dreidel, is a little gambling game with the letters for the words Nes Gadol Hayasham, a great miracle happened there. In Israel, you can buy dreidels which have a pei instead of a shin, which mean a great miracle happened here. And I will talk more about this next week, but although Hanukkah is the only ancient holiday that we celebrate that is not in the Bible at all, it's only in the Talmud, and so it is not considered to be a very significant holiday. It does have some powerful, I would say, spiritual significance. And this I learned from Rabbi Mordechai Finley. One of the deeper meanings of Hanukkah is that although you don't think you have enough, you don't think you have enough time, you don't think you have enough patience, you don't think you have enough money, you don't think you have enough wisdom, the lesson of Hanukkah is you do have enough. The Maccabees didn't have enough armor and people and weapons to fight the Greeks, but they succeeded. And of course, the mirror story of the oil is there was not enough oil to last for 8 days, but in fact, it did last for 8 days. And I would think even more powerful is the idea that what was impure can be made pure. So the celebration of Hanukkah is the rededication of the temple when it had been horribly fouled by the Greek Assyrians. They sacrificed pigs on the altar. They put idols and statues in the temple in Jerusalem, and the Maccabees were able to cleanse the temple. And so again, a deeper lesson of Hanukkah, I believe, is no matter what has happened in your life, with faith, with friends, with family, with community, with God, you can make your life pure again. You can make your life whole again. And I think that's a deep message of Hanukkah. Pointing out that we don't celebrate the original dedication of the temple. When Solomon built the temple and dedicated it, we don't celebrate that date. We celebrate only the rededication. We celebrate not the brand spanking new temple. We celebrate the temple which had been horribly fouled and then made clean again. Purim is really our Halloween. If you read the book of Esther carefully, you will read all kinds of references to dressing up and dressing down and fake clothing and people being fooled by clothing and lack of clothing. Again, book of Esther is a great text to study in detail. And once again, it celebrates, you know, someone once said you can, every Jewish holiday basically can be summarized quite simply as saying, they tried to kill us, they didn't, let's eat. The only counterexample to that is Yom Kippur, where you have to delay eating. But a story of Haman, Ahasuerus in Persia, even though the Jews were well established, a ruler arose that didn't remember that Jews were loyal subjects, and because of one of his prime ministers, they decided, the prime minister said, is it okay with you if I kill all the Jews? And the king's response was, sure, no problem. Robin.
If you like, I'll wear my diadem next week.
Your diadem?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as long as you don't follow Vashti completely in the tradition. And we'll explain what that means. The name refers to lots, probably a Purim word for drawing straws to decide which day that Haman would destroy all the Jews. Again, the deeper meaning is that no matter how good you have it in the diaspora, even if a Jew can become queen, Esther becomes, a Jewess becomes queen of Persia. At the whim of a government official, all Jews can face death. We are never safe in the diaspora. I have to tell you, I feel safe living in the diaspora in this country, but I also can't quite shake the reality that Jews living in Germany in the 30s, early part of the 30s after the First World War, felt equally safe. And so there's always this underlying nervousness about our security. And another lesson is never write off assimilated Jews. Esther and Mordecai were very assimilated, and yet it was up to them to save the Jewish people. And another lesson is whosoever would be God must destroy the Jews totally. Passover. Passover comes in the spring, and there's a lot of tradition associated with Passover. We'll discuss it a little more deeply next time here. The handbook has lots of material about Passover and the symbols. But basically what we're commemorating is the Exodus and Moses and the Israelites and God's victory over the gods of Egypt and being redeemed and being freed in the desert, but free not just to do whatever we want, but free to serve God. 8-day holiday. There are 2 commandments associated with it. You must eat matzah, and you cannot eat chametz. We'll talk a lot more next week about what those things are. There is a traditional reading called the Haggadah. The word Haggadah is related to the Hebrew word for a story, so we read the story. And if you look at a traditional Haggadah, it doesn't mention Moses. So think about it. This is an entire story telling about the leaving of Egypt, and they tell it without mentioning Moses at all. I mean, there's one minor mention of Moses, I think, in a traditional Haggadah. And the point there is the rabbis writing this story were very nervous about Christianity and the idea of raising the status of one human being to be a god or a demigod. And they were nervous about Moses taking that role. And in fact, many scholars believe that the reason we don't know where Moses is buried, somewhere in Jordan, is that the same thing, that his site would become, or his burial site would become a major pilgrimage site, and there was fear of people worshiping Moses. Many Jews, I don't know if the 90% number is still accurate, attend a Seder. The Hebrew word Seder means order, because the things that happen during this ritual meal are in a very specific order. And the deeper meaning is live as though you were personally freed from Egypt. Examine your life to see what you are a slave to. Shavuot, again, originally a harvest holiday in the spring, now is a holiday. The rabbis add the historical dimension of receiving the Torah at Sinai. It literally means weeks. We count the days from our moment of freedom, the Exodus, Passover, to the purpose of freedom, the receiving of the Torah. I'll mention next time. Every time Moses tells Pharaoh that God says, let my people go, every one of those lines is followed immediately by the purpose of letting the people go, and that is to receive the law, to worship God. And the idea here also with Torah and covenant, very powerful, very important, is that God binds God's self to a relationship. Certainly, we understand with the relationship with our people, I would say God is in relationship with other people as well. But unlike the Greek gods, the Roman gods, and so on, God is bound by that relationship. God just can't willy-nilly violate the relationship. First harvest, the book of Ruth is read traditionally on Shavuot because it takes place during this time. And there's a tradition of late night Torah study. The mystics introduce this idea of staying up all night long the night before Shavuot. There are some modern holidays. There are holidays remembering the Holocaust, a holiday of Israel Memorial Day, which is actually the day before Israel Independence Day. So Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut is Israel Independence Day. And it's very powerful in Israel because Memorial Day, there is no family living in Israel that is untouched by having lost some relative in one of the wars. So Israel Memorial Day is not a day of picnics and celebration. It is really a very somber and sad day. And then it's sunset. Again, you have this phenomenon where the day changes at sunset. So right at sunset, I've been in Jerusalem a couple of times for this happening, people just start celebrating and you start having fireworks and people going crazy. And it's so evocative of life in Israel that you go from tragedy, great tragedy, to great celebration at the blink of an eye. And I love the quote, mentioned it before, in Israel, if you don't believe in miracles, you are not a realist. Okay, so let me turn to Shabbat. And here are some major symbols of Shabbat. We have wine, we have Sabbath lights, we have a braided challah, and we also have the greeting Shabbat Shalom. I love pointing out that the greetings that we give each other in Hebrew are tied to the amount of light going on. So we say Boker Tov, that's good morning. And a response, although the Israelis never use this, we all learned this in Hebrew school, but the Israelis don't use this. When you say Boker Tov, a response is Boker Or, which is Boker Tov, Boker is morning, Tov is good, good morning, Boker Or, a morning of light. So you have light in the morning. You have a different kind of light in the afternoon. The greeting is Tzoharayim Tovim. You have a different kind of light in the evening, Erev Tov, and a different kind of light late at night, Laila Tov. On Shabbat, we don't use any of those greetings. We just say Shabbat Shalom. And one mystical insight into this is the light of the Sabbath just overwhelms all the other light in our lives. So, overview. I think it's Achad Ha'am who said, more than Israel has kept the Sabbath, has the Sabbath kept Israel. Of all of creation, in the days of the 6 days of creation, 7 days of creation, there are some things which are good, there are some things which are very good, nothing's perfect, nothing's bad, but only Sabbath is holy. It's the only thing in existence that's holy. And it's the only thing described as holy in the Ten Commandments. And then, based on the discussion we had a minute ago, Murray raised, it's the only thing in the creation story that is wholly new to the world. So in the creation story, you know, we have the moon being created and the sun and the stars and animals growing and things being named and man and women. And why is a man attracted to a woman? And why do they seek to become one flesh? We have all of these sort of etiologies, stories of origin. The Sabbath doesn't seem to relate to anything physical or pre-existence. It's an invention in the story. And then there are two reasons in the Torah for the Sabbath. In the book of Exodus, the reason is given that on the seventh day, God rested. And then in the book of Deuteronomy, when the 10 Commandments are repeated, the explanation is to commemorate the Exodus from Egypt. I would say broadly across the different Jewish denominations, there is agreement that the Sabbath is a time for spiritual refreshment, that we should do something to reflect the holiness of the day. And there's a wide variation on what should be done. It's a reminder not to let the need to make a living make us blind to the need for living. So I would say, you know, if you're in the Orthodox world or the conservative world, there's going to be a ton of very specific rules. In the Reform world, I don't know any Reform rabbis who would say, you know, Sabbath, old, outmoded, just ignore it. But they would say, you know, how do you make the day holy? So for some, it might be to take a drive in the mountains. Now, that would be prohibited under the traditional Sabbath rules, but that may be the way that you make the Sabbath holy.
Question. Could
Yes.
you give us a Jewish definition for holy?
Yes, actually, I will give it for the Hebrew word kodesh. And kodesh refers to the concept of a separate relationship. In fact, another name for marriage is kiddushin, which means holiness, but it's really talking about the unique relationship between the two people getting married. So I would say setting aside the Sabbath as something separate for a relationship that is exclusive between us and God. I would say it's exclusive for us. We have no other gods. I do believe God has other peoples, but there is an exclusivity about that relationship is the key here to holiness. And, you know, if you look it up in the dictionary, you'll find a bunch of definitions. But the root meaning of the word kodesh is that it gets back to separation. There's in the handbook, that big yellow book, there's lots of discussion about what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. The insight from Rabbi Greenberg that I love is the idea that on the Sabbath, we are getting a taste, a foretaste of what the world will be like once we've done all the work in the world and now we've achieved redemption. The central idea in Judaism, as I understand it, is God could have created a perfect world. If we lived in a perfect world, I don't know if I've discussed this with this group, if we lived in a perfect world, there'd be nothing for us to do. We would be decorations in God's garden. We wouldn't have any moral significance. And we wouldn't have any jobs because there'd be nothing to do. So instead, or clearly in the Torah, it says we're created b'tselem Elohim, in the divine image. So we, like God, must have serious, ethical, creative work to do. And so God turns over to us as God's messengers, God's agents, God's angels, to do God's work in the world. I'll call you in a second, Bryce. And someday in the future, who knows, don't hold your breath, will be completed and the world will be perfect. What energizes us on that path? The idea that once a week, we pretend we've done it. On once a week, as much as humanly possible, we pretend we have achieved redemption. We don't do any work, not because there's anything inherently bad about work, but there's nothing to do. We don't spend money because we have everything we need. People that can barely put a decent meal on the table will save up food so that their Friday night dinner will be, you know, very, very special. And it's considered to be a foretaste of the world to come. Bryce.
So assume that we have perfected the world, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Okay? So that means that there's nothing more to do.
Yes.
So we are beings that thrive on having something to do. So once we have succeeded, then we live a life that we are not suited to.
Don't worry about it, Bryce. It's not going to happen. The Talmud says, "Lo alacha hamlacha ligmor." It's not up to you to complete the task. V'lo ata ben charim lehivatel mimena. But everybody has to do something.
Okay?
And so, I believe the point of it is the journey, is the working on it, not the actual success. There's a great interpretation, Maimonides, who is very rational and probably didn't really believe in the traditional Messiah, said he believed in one of his 13 principles in Bidiyat Mashiach, in the coming of the Messiah. So I also don't believe that there's an individual Messiah coming at some certain date in the future, and then I'm going to worry about all these problems. But I do believe in the concept of the coming of the Messiah. I believe that that list of tasks to do, the mitzvot, is a real set of tasks. And the idea is experiencing it or pretending we've experienced it once a week energizes us for the following week. I love to throw in the slightly snide comment that working on the world is a full-time job 24/6. The Sabbath is viewed as a bride, and there's a mystical poem called Lecha Dodi, written in Sfat in probably the 15th, 16th century, where they image the arrival of the Sabbath the way a bridegroom anticipates the arrival of his bride on their wedding night. We don't do anything that affects creation because we're pretending creation is complete. It's as though, and there's lots of poetic imagery here, we pause in our painting or in creating a work of art simply to contemplate it and not to try and improve it. Dress in our best clothes, sing songs, relax with the family, study Torah. There's even a mystical tradition of trying to unify God's male and female aspects in heaven by having sex on Friday night. And I'll talk more about that when we get into Kabbalah. And I've even written a song to the tune of Achy Breaky Heart called Double Mitzvah Friday Night, after which you may want to report me to the Board of Rabbis. There's also another, I think, beautiful tradition that you have an extra soul on Shabbat. And with this, when this extra soul returns to heaven, God asks this soul, what did you learn and what did you do on Shabbat? Pity the poor soul that just had to accompany its goof, its body, who went to work and just treated Shabbat as an ordinary day, and it's just great for the soul that can talk about the Torah it learned and the relationships it's deepened and the love it enjoyed on that sixth day. Other traditions, ethics is a way to serve God, ritual is the way to connect with God, and Shabbat combines the two. One of the reasons for gefilte fish is a interesting phenomenon. It's very Ashkenazi, and I would say it's an acquired taste, but I don't know anyone who has successfully acquired a taste to gefilte fish.
It is the fish of affliction.
It is the fish of affliction. Either you're born liking it or you never will. My wife can't stand gefilte fish. One of the reasons for gefilte fish is that a very wealthy meal, a rich meal, would be a meal in which you would have a fish course and a meat course. So on Shabbat, we're pretending we're rich, so we're going to have fish and meat, but because many people couldn't afford the two, gefilte fish is sort of the pescal equivalent of hamburger or maybe even sausage, in that you're probably better off not knowing exactly what's in the gefilte fish. And then there's also an halachic issue that you're not supposed to be on Shabbat separating things. So if you're eating a bony fish on Shabbat, you're not supposed to be separating the bones out, which is a problem. But gefilte fish, no problem. And then at the end of the Sabbath, there's a ceremony called Havdalah, which basically commemorates the end of the Sabbath and the beginning of the work week. It occurs, of course, at sunset on Shabbat. There's lots of rules and customs about observing the Sabbath. And so in the handbook, you will find these, page 236. Here is what is traditional: setting a special table, flowers, good dishes, dressing up, and so on, inviting guests. The mitzvah of tzedakah, of giving to charity, just before the Sabbath, because we don't handle money on the Sabbath. A candle lighting, traditionally 18 minutes before sunset. 2 candles, lots of symbolism there for the 2 worlds. 2 words, I'm sorry. Zachor, remember, and Shamor, guard. In the Exodus and Deuteronomy, you have both. You light the candles first, then you say the blessing. This is an interesting one. There's only 2 instances in which you say the blessing, in which you do the deed first and you say the blessing second. So if you were going to drink wine, you would say the blessing over the wine, then drink the wine. If you're going to have bread, you say the blessing over the bread, then eat the bread. You're going to put a mezuzah on the door, blessing first, and so on and so on. On Shabbat, the tradition is, and here's the take on it I like, there's lots of different explanations. You light the candles, then you close your eyes. And you say the blessing, and then you open your eyes. Why do we do that? Because the tradition is, once you've said the blessing over the Sabbath candles, you have taken upon Sabbath for yourself. Once you are in the Sabbath, you can't light anything, including Sabbath candles. So the way I like to explain this is you light the candles and you close your eyes and you pretend that they're not lit. And then you say the Sabbath blessing, and miracle of miracles, the candles have been magically lit. The other blessing you say before doing something is, the blessing you say after doing something is the blessing that a convert says upon immersion. Because traditionally, the moment someone becomes Jewish is the moment they immerse themselves in the mikvah, in the waters. And you can't say the blessing before you do that because you're not Jewish. So you immerse yourself first, you come up, and now you're Jewish, and now you can say the blessing. And there's custom of silence between the motzi and eating the bread, and the blessings after the meal. More about Sabbath observance. Orthodox, traditionally, traditionally what happens is the women are at home preparing dinner, the men go to synagogue. The men go to synagogue for a very brief service because Sabbath is a home-focused family meal. Candles are lit 18 minutes before sunset. The men are doing in synagogue, and then they come home. In conservative and definitely in Reform, in many congregations, candles will be lit in the synagogue at a specific time. So if Sabbath services start at 7:30, that means, for roughly half the year, we'll be lighting the candles too soon, and half the year we'll be lighting them too late. But that's what we're doing. And we're also transporting the custom of lighting the candles from the home into the synagogue. In many small congregations, there may not be a Saturday morning service because of the practical problem that many people just don't come to services on Saturday morning and find it easier to come to services on Friday night. I would say that's only true in the Reform world and conservative world. You will always have a Saturday morning service. In many Reform synagogues, you will have Saturday morning services, but in many, you won't. There might be a Torah reading Friday night. That's not traditional. It is traditional to read the Torah Saturday morning. And you probably have heard the word oneg. And oneg doesn't mean good food and cookies and cakes. It actually means the joy. Oneg Shabbat means the joy of Shabbat, which for Jews is rugelach and sweet cakes and good stuff to eat. There's lots of ideas in the handbook regarding observance. And I would say the principle is to make the day different and sacred and holy. And the principle, the underlying principle, is avoiding changing the world. It's being in the world and not working on changing it. You should decide what you will do and not do. This may change over time. This is spiritual discipline. What changes do you make in your life? You know, we'll talk about keeping kosher. You can talk about observing holidays. These are spiritual disciplines. And spiritual disciplines can and will improve your life. If you were Orthodox and conservative, you would have specific, detailed instructions on what you're supposed to do. Life is more flexible in the Reform world. And I would say, don't adopt an all or nothing approach. A phrase I learned as a management consultant, which I find very helpful and meaningful, is, and you probably have heard it as well, don't make the best the enemy of the good. Simply because you're not observing all the elements of Shabbat, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing something. Simply because you're not keeping strictly glatt kosher with 2 sets of dishes and so on, we'll discuss it, doesn't mean you shouldn't take upon some dietary spiritual discipline. Don't make the best the enemy of the good. And then for me, you know, the joy of Shabbat, I love services. What I really love is Torah study. And there is a Temple of Dad Elohim has a wonderful Torah study Saturday mornings. And we will have it this Saturday morning. And if anyone's interested in joining that Torah study, let me know and I will email you the link for that Torah study. Actually, there's probably no reason why I can't or shouldn't do it here. So let me see if I can do that real quick. How do I do it? Okay. Let's see. Whoops. Yeah, here it is. Hold on. Okay, so I am going to paste it into chat if I can. Yes, I can. So there, whoops, there is the link for Torah study at Temple Adad Elohim in chat. It's wonderful. At 8 o'clock, from 8 to 8:45, we study Talmud. From 8:45 to 9:30, we study Torah. And we actually have 3 rabbis. We have Rabbi Diamond, who is the congregational rabbi of Temple Adad Elohim, and Rabbi Lisa Bach, and myself, almost always coming. At the end of the Sabbath, as I mentioned, is a ceremony called Havdalah, which means separation. There are again blessings on wine and spices. And the idea of wine is pretty much we have wine with everything in Judaism. Sweet wine representing the sweetness of life. We have spices to try and hold on to this extra Sabbath soul that we get and to console ourselves at the end of the Sabbath as we lose that extra neshama yeterah, extra Sabbath soul. And then we put out a multi-wicked candle in the wine, and it sort of symbolizes at the beginning of the Sabbath, we're lighting lights, we're lighting candles. At the end of the Sabbath, we're extinguishing a candle. And we sing traditional songs. We sing a song about Elijah, who is traditionally held to be someone who will bring the Messiah to us. And the reason we are singing about Elijah is the Sabbath has been a taste of the Messianic age. And now we know the Messiah hasn't come and we need to go back to the work week. So we sing about Bimhei Ravi Amenu, Bimhei Ravi Amenu, quickly and speedily in our days, Yavo Eleinu, may he come to us. In Mashiach ben David, with the Messiah, the son of David, in Mashiach ben David. So we're basically asking Elijah to come with a Messiah. And we sing Shavuot Tov, which means a good week. And traditionally the days begin, so Murray, more details, The days begin when you can see 3 significant stars in the sky. And of course, the Sunday, the first day, begins then also. So traditionally with Havdalah, you don't make Havdalah until you see 3 stars in the sky. You can delay Havdalah, I have been told, until Wednesday. So you can take upon yourself keeping the Sabbath until Wednesday. Why Wednesday? Because after Wednesday, you're closer to the next Shabbat than you are to the last Shabbat. You can start the Sabbath early, you can end the Sabbath late. There's a wonderful book. Abraham Joshua Heschel is an amazing writer, a German rabbi, learned English, and his command of the English language is breathtaking. And his writing actually can be quite difficult, but he has a wonderful book called The Sabbath. And there's just some wonderful insights in them. And, as I move toward the end here, I'm just going to share them with you. There's a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. There is happiness in the love of labor. There is misery in the love of gain. The higher goal of spiritual living is not to amass a wealth of information, but to face sacred moments. Judaism is the religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time. The meaning of the Sabbath is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Sabbath, we try to become attuned to holiness in time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world. 6 days a week, we seek to dominate the world. On the 7th day, we try to dominate the self. Just as creation began with the word, "Let there be light," so does the celebration of creation begin with kindling of lights. We share time, we own space. Through my ownership of space, I am a rival of other beings. Through my living in time, I am a contemporary of all other beings. Time is God's gift to the world of space. So my bottom line, yes, Angela.
I wanted to add in that my husband is a superintendent of a school district in Ontario. And with the pandemic and closing schools and going virtual, it's obviously been a very challenging time for him. And I found it to be really interesting. One of the school board members is a Christian pastor. And he said that it was his belief that my husband was able to continue and to work diligently within the school because of the Sabbath, and because on Shabbat he turns off all of his emails, turns off all of his social media, and really truly celebrates Shabbat.
Yeah, so Shabbat thank you for that. Shabbat can be a reminder of what we are addicted to. If you can't live without your cell phone and checking Facebook, you are addicted. If you can't live without gossip and saying nasty things about people, you are addicted. How do you know? Give it a try. I think there's a lot of movement, not only in Jewish circles, of sort of an electronic Sabbath, of having one day a week in which we are not glued to our cell phones. I often think if someone from another planet came and visited, they would conclude that we worship these things. We literally walk around bumping into things with our rapt attention on our phones. So when the Torah says you will have no other gods before me, they don't necessarily mean clay figurines that you make. It's basically anything that is the work of your hands. And again, I'll just repeat the idea I mentioned a while ago. Don't let the best be the enemy of the good. Start observing Sabbath in some way, and then let your soul be your guide. It can be life-changing and it can be inspiring, but don't be intimidated by the fact that it's an overwhelming task. try a little bit at a time, and let your spirit be your guide. Questions and answers. Any other questions, closing thoughts? Next week we are going to be discussing more Jewish holidays. I think basically, yeah, I think it's Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot. Let me see. The agenda right here. Oh no, so also Chanukah, Purim, Pesach. Yes. Sorry, go ahead. Somebody say something? No. Yeah, on the 30th, Chanukah, Purim, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. I think I sent out to everyone that there's a program tomorrow night, an interfaith program on the meaning of life. And now I have the information in front of me. So we're going to have a representative, actually 3 women speaking on, one about Islam, one about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Unitarian Universalists, addressing the questions: why does the universe exist? Why does humanity exist? What is the meaning of life? And what is the meaning of my life? That's tomorrow night at 7, and I think I sent the link.
Will that be recorded, do you know?
Yes, it will be recorded. I hadn't planned to put it on my website, but I can probably get the link, and I'll distribute the link. Yeah,
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Did you mention the source of the statement, the best is the enemy of the better?
Well, what I said, don't let the best be the enemy of the good. I have no idea what the source of that is.
Okay, thank you.
So therefore, I probably didn't mention it.
Okay.
But I do think it's true in life, and it's. I learned it in a management consultant course, a management course. But it's. I think it's absolutely true in much of life. Anything else?
It's
And
Voltaire.
I'm sorry?
It is Voltaire.
Well, really?
Yes.
Oh, how cool is that?
He wrote, "The best is the enemy of the good."
He wrote okay, yes. So that I would say.
He probably wrote it in French, but that's the translation.
Yes. Interesting. Also unless I'm confusing with somebody, I don't think I am, horrible anti-Semite, Voltaire.
Yes.
So we will have a session on anti-Semitism and the different kinds of anti-Semitism. And Voltaire was Voltaire's objection was to us being a separate people. Christian anti-Semitism, not accepting Jesus. Muslim anti-Semitism, not accepting Muhammad and Allah. And the list goes on. Okay. I am going to end the recording. I think I can do that. How do I